She stepped off the train in a wedding dress, ready to start her new life. But the man she was supposed to marry wasn't there. Instead, all she got was a 4-word telegram that shattered her world. The howling wind in Cottonwood Creek, Wyoming, didn't just carry snow that December night in 1875. It carried the sound of Willow Thompson's heart breaking into 1,000 tiny pieces. She stood on the isolated train platform, the ivory fabric of her wedding dress whipping around her legs like an angry ghost. The sun was gone, the blizzard was here, and she was utterly alone. In her frozen fingers, she clutched the telegram. She'd read it 20 times, but the words never changed. They just got crueler. Cannot marry stop. Found another stop. Sorry stop. 4 years. 4 years of letters, of promises whispered across 1,000 miles on paper. 4 years of saving every penny, of dreaming of a man she'd never even met. All of it had led to this. A train platform in the middle of nowhere, a wedding dress turning into an icy shroud, and a telegram that felt like a slap in the face. The station master had tried to warn her. "Miss, you can't stay out here," he'd said, his voice full of pity. "Town's 2 miles north. Might find a room if you hurry." Then he'd locked the station door, leaving her to the storm's mercy. But she couldn't move. It wasn't just the cold that paralyzed her. It was the shame. The thought of going back to Boston, unmarried and broken, was a fate worse than freezing to death. She had sold everything. She had told everyone. Pride was a heavy anchor, and it was holding her right there on that platform as the snow started to collect on her eyelashes. That's when she heard it. A sound cutting through the howl of the wind. Hoofbeats. A lone rider appeared out of the swirling white, a dark silhouette growing larger and larger. Willow blinked, the ice on her lashes making it hard to see. Was she hallucinating? Was this how it ended, with a phantom cowboy riding out of a storm? He pulled his horse to a stop, dismounting in one smooth, practiced motion. His spurs jingled against the frozen wood of the platform. "Madam," his voice was a low rumble, deeper than the storm. "Good Lord, what are you doing out here?" He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat covered in snow. "I'm waiting," Willow whispered, her voice a thin thread of sound. "He'll come. He has to." The cowboy stepped closer, into the faint light from a distant lantern. Now she could see his face, a strong jaw covered in a few days of dark stubble. And his eyes. They were as blue as a summer sky, a startling warmth in the frozen landscape. He looked at the telegram in her hand, then back at her face. Understanding dawned in those blue eyes. He didn't say a word. He just shrugged off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate, shocking. It smelled of leather and pine and man, and it carried his own body heat. It was the first real warmth she'd felt in hours, and it made her start to cry. "You'll never freeze again," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Not while I'm around." He glanced at the dark, locked station. "Station's closed." Willow just nodded, her teeth chattering too hard to speak. "My name's Ryder Reed," he said. "I've got a cabin about a mile from here. It ain't much, but it's warm." He studied her face, his gaze searching. "You got anyone expecting you? Anyone I can take you to?" The question was like a knife twisting in her gut. "No," she whispered. "No one's expecting me anymore." Ryder's jaw tightened. "Let's get you somewhere warm before you catch your death." He whistled, and his horse, a powerful beast named Dakota, stepped closer. In one fluid movement, he lifted Willow into the saddle as if she weighed nothing. Then he swung up behind her, his arm a solid bar around her waist, holding her tight against his chest. His body was a furnace at her back. "Hold tight," he said, his voice right next to her ear. "Dakota knows the way home." The ride was a blur. Willow drifted, lost in a haze of cold and grief, aware only of the steady beat of the horse's hooves and the solid man holding her, keeping her from falling. When they finally stopped, she barely knew it. He carried her inside a small cabin, and the blast of heat from a wood stove was so intense it was painful. "Easy now," Ryder murmured, setting her down gently in a chair by the fire. He knelt in front of her, taking her frozen hands in his own. His hands were huge, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he rubbed life back into her fingers. "Your fingers are like ice," he said. "We got to warm you up slow." Through her tears, Willow looked around. The cabin was one room, simple and clean. A stove, a small table, a few books on a shelf, and a narrow bed in the corner. It wasn't Boston, but it was salvation. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I was thinking." "Heartbreak makes folks do foolish things," Ryder said simply. He stood up and moved to a small cupboard. "Got a story you want to share?" He paused, then looked at her. "Or is it Miss Thompson?" Willow froze. A new kind of cold, one that had nothing to do with the weather, washed over her. She hadn't told him her name. How did this stranger, this cowboy who appeared out of a blizzard, know her name? He saw the fear in her eyes. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before he masked it. He gestured toward the telegram still crumpled in her hand. "I saw it," he said, his voice even. "When I put my coat on you, the station master must have written your name on the envelope." It was a logical explanation. It made perfect sense. But as Willow stared into his impossibly blue eyes, a tiny seed of doubt was planted. It felt too easy, too convenient. "Yes," she said slowly, forcing herself to relax. "Willow Thompson." She told him the whole story then. The advertisement for a bride, the 4 years of letters from a man named Edward Parker, the journey west in the wedding dress he'd requested, the final, brutal telegram. Ryder listened without interrupting, his hands busy making coffee. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his knuckles were white as he gripped the coffee pot. 4 years, he said, his voice a low growl. "Some men don't deserve the air they breathe." "I sold everything," Willow confessed, the words tumbling out now. "My parents are gone. I have nothing to go back to." Ryder placed a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. The warmth was a comfort. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I have $7 to my name." "First thing you're gonna do is get some rest," Ryder said firmly. "Tomorrow, when the storm passes, we'll figure out the next steps." He went to a trunk at the foot of his bed and pulled out a flannel shirt and a pair of pants. "These'll be big, but they're dry. You can change behind that screen." Willow took the clothes, suddenly hyper-aware of their situation. Alone in a tiny cabin with a man she just met. A man who somehow knew her name. "Mr. Reed," she started. "You can take the bed," he cut in, reading her mind. "I'll sleep by the fire. Tomorrow we'll ride into town. Find you a room at the boarding house. Everything will be proper." His kindness was disarming. It made her doubt her own suspicions. After she changed, she sat on the edge of the bed, the borrowed clothes swallowing her whole. The wind howled outside, rattling the single window. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, watching him bank the fire for the night. 3 years, he answered, his back to her. "Bought this land after working for the Wilsons. It ain't much, but it's mine." "You live here alone?" He turned then, a ghost of a smile on his face. "Just me and Dakota." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "It's a good life, Miss Thompson. Quiet." There was something in the way he said quiet, like it was something he'd fought hard for, like the alternative was loud and dangerous. "Get some sleep," he said, laying his bedroll on the floor. Willow slid under the heavy wool blankets on his bed. They smelled like him, of pine and leather. It should have been strange, but it was comforting. "Mr. Reed," she murmured as sleep began to take her. "Yes, Miss Thompson. Thank you for saying I'd never freeze again, even if it was just words. I needed to hear them." In the dim firelight, she saw him smile. A real smile this time. "Wasn't just words, Miss Thompson," he said. "I don't make promises I can't keep." Willow woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. For a second, she was completely lost. Then the memory of the blizzard, the telegram, and the mysterious cowboy crashed back in. She sat up. Ryder was at the stove, his back to her. "Morning," he said without turning. "Storm's past." She folded the blankets neatly. "I don't know how to repay you for last night." He turned, 2 plates in his hands. "No need. Anyone would have done the same." But they both knew that wasn't true. After breakfast, she put on the hated wedding dress. It felt like a costume from another life. "I'll take you into town," Ryder said, saddling Dakota. "Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house might have work for you." The ride to Cottonwood Creek was short. In the bright morning light, Willow saw that Ryder's not much was actually beautiful. Rolling hills, a small stream, snow-capped mountains in the distance. The town itself was one dusty main street. As Ryder helped her down from the horse in front of Wilson's boarding house, she felt every eye in town on her. A woman in a wedding dress arriving with the town recluse. The door to the boarding house swung open before they could knock. A stout woman with sharp eyes and silver hair stood there. "Ryder Reed," she said, her voice full of surprise. "Twice in town in 1 week. The world must be ending." Her eyes landed on Willow, taking in the dress with a raised eyebrow. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Miss Willow Thompson," Ryder said, removing his hat. "She's had some unfortunate circumstances. Needs a room, maybe a job." Mrs. Wilson's face softened instantly. "Another one of Parker's girls," she said, shaking her head in disgust. "3rd one this year. That man ought to be horsewhipped." Willow stared. "Others?" There were others. "Come inside, dear," Mrs. Wilson said, holding the door. She gave Ryder a look. "You coming in for coffee, or are you too busy being a mysterious man of the mountains?" A faint flush colored Ryder's cheeks. "Got chores. Just wanted to make sure Miss Thompson was settled." "She will be," Mrs. Wilson said. "I've got a room, and I need help in the dining room. Can you sew, girl?" "Yes, ma'am. I was a seamstress in Boston." Even better. Relief washed over Willow. She turned to Ryder. "Thank you for everything." His blue eyes held hers for a moment too long. "I'll check on you in a few days." As he rode off, Mrs. Wilson led her inside. "Now," she said, her voice dropping conspiratorially, "you tell me everything, and then I'll tell you about Edward Parker, his collection of mail-order brides, and the real reason Ryder Reed keeps to himself." By that evening, Willow felt like she'd lived in Cottonwood Creek her whole life. Mrs. Wilson was a fountain of information. Edward Parker, it turned out, was a phantom. No one in town knew him. He had a post office box, that was all. He'd been luring women west for over a year, always with the same promise, always with the same last-minute, cruel rejection. Why? No one knew. But the second thing Willow learned was even more unsettling. Ryder Reed was a complete enigma. He rode into town 3 years ago, bought that land, and mostly keeps to himself, Mrs. Wilson explained as they cleaned the kitchen. Some say he was a lawman, others say he rode with a rough crowd. All I know is he's quiet, pays his bills, and helps folks when they're in a jam. "He saved my life," Willow said. Mrs. Wilson patted her hand. "That he did, dear, that he did. But a man with no past is a man with a secret. You be careful." The warning echoed in Willow's mind as she lay in her small, clean room at the boarding house. She thought of his kindness, the warmth of his coat, the promise in his voice. But she also thought of how he knew her name and the guarded look in his eyes when he talked about his quiet life. Something didn't add up. 3 days later, Ryder appeared at the boarding house, just as he'd promised. He stood awkwardly in the dining room, holding his hat, looking completely out of place. "Miss Thompson," he nodded. He seemed nervous. "Just came to see how you were faring." "I'm doing well, thanks to you," she smiled, leading him to a small table. His eyes took in her new calico dress, a simple thing she'd sewn for herself. "That's good to hear," he said, turning his hat over and over in his hands. He reached into his pocket. "Found this at the station when I went back for your trunk. Figured you might want it." He placed a small silver locket on the table. Willow gasped. It was her mother's. She thought she'd lost it forever on the platform. She opened it, looking at the tiny portraits of her parents inside. "How can I ever thank you?" "No need," he said quickly. He cleared his throat. "I was also wondering if you might do some mending for me. Got some shirts need patching." It was a clumsy, transparent excuse to give her money. Willow's heart softened. "I'd be happy to, Mr. Reed. Call me Ryder." "Then you must call me Willow." Their eyes met, and a spark, warm and unexpected, passed between them. He stood up abruptly. "I'll bring the mending by next week." "Perhaps you'll stay for dinner," she offered. "As a thank you." A small smile touched his lips. "I'd like that." After he left, Mrs. Wilson appeared at her side, a knowing look on her face. "Well, that's a first. Never seen that man seek out company before." "He was just being kind," Willow said, her cheeks flushing. "Mm-hmm," Mrs. Wilson hummed, "and I'm the Queen of England." A pattern began. Every Saturday, Ryder came to town. He brought mending, shirts with tears that looked suspiciously deliberate. They would eat dinner together, and slowly, cautiously, they started sharing pieces of their lives. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about a sister in California. He mentioned being in the war, just briefly, but the years between the war and Wyoming remained a blank, empty space. She told him about Boston, about her parents, about the lonely years before she answered Edward Parker's ad. "It wasn't foolish to want love," Ryder said one night, his voice low. "It was foolish of him not to see what he was throwing away." By February, Willow had a life, a real one. Her sewing business was booming, but her Saturdays with Ryder were the center of her week. "You're sweet on him," Mrs. Wilson stated one evening. Willow didn't deny it. "He's a good man." "The best," Mrs. Wilson agreed. "But what did I tell you, girl? A man like that carries shadows." The next Saturday, Ryder didn't come. Willow waited, her stomach churning with anxiety. 9 o'clock came and went. "Maybe something came up at the ranch," Mrs. Wilson said gently. But Willow knew something was wrong. The next morning, after a sleepless night, she borrowed a horse. "I'm going to check on him," she told Mrs. Wilson. "Take some stew," the older woman said. "Man probably forgot to eat." As Willow rode toward Ryder's land, a sense of dread grew with every mile. When she crested the final hill, her heart stopped. The cabin door was swinging open. Dakota was in the corral, but the place was deathly still. "Ryder," she called, her voice shaking. No answer. She slid off the horse and ran inside. The cabin was a disaster. Furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled out, their contents strewn across the floor. It had been ransacked. Ryder was gone. Then she saw it. On the rough-hewn floorboards next to a dark, sticky pool of what could only be blood, was a single playing card, the ace of spades, and tucked just under the leg of the overturned table was a piece of paper, a folded, crumpled, wanted poster. She picked it up with trembling hands. The drawing was rough, but the eyes were unmistakable. They were the same summer sky blue she knew so well. The name printed underneath, however, was not Ryder Reed. It was Ryder the Ghost Callahan, wanted for armed robbery, member of the notorious Black Creek Gang. Mrs. Wilson's words echoed in her ears. A man with no past is a man with a secret. It seemed Ryder Reed's secret was about to get them both killed. Willow's world tilted on its axis. Ryder, the kind, quiet man who had saved her, who had promised she'd never freeze again, was a wanted outlaw. The blood on the floor, the ransacked cabin. It wasn't Rustler's. It was his past come to collect. She crumpled the poster in her fist, her mind racing. What should she do? Ride for the sheriff? Tell him the man he knew as Ryder Reed was a fugitive? But the thought of betraying Ryder, even this dangerous stranger he'd turned out to be, felt wrong. He had saved her life. He had been nothing but good to her. No, she had to understand. She had to find him. She searched the cabin, looking for any clue, any sign of where he might have gone. In the cold ashes of the fireplace, she found something. A small, half-burnt piece of a letter. Most of it was gone, but a few words were still visible. Parker demands his share, the ledger, or your pretty seamstress pays the price. Parker, Edward Parker, the man who had lured her here. He wasn't just a heartless coward who jilted women by telegram. He was connected to Ryder's violent past, and now he was connected to her. This wasn't a coincidence. None of it was. Her arrival in Cottonwood Creek, Ryder finding her on the platform. It was all part of something bigger, something dark and deadly. She was a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. Willow rode back to town like the devil was on her heels. She didn't go to the sheriff. Not yet. She went straight to Mrs. Wilson. She slammed the wanted poster and the burnt scrap of letter down on the kitchen table. "Tell me everything you know," she demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. Mrs. Wilson's face went pale. "I knew he had trouble in his past," she whispered, picking up the poster. "But I never knew it was this." She looked at the letter. Parker. Oh, that devil. The story came tumbling out. Mrs. Wilson admitted she had been suspicious of Ryder from the start. He paid for his land in solid gold coin, girl, not something a simple ranch hand comes by honestly. But he'd been a good neighbor, and she'd decided to let his past be his own business. But Edward Parker was another story. "He showed up in town about a year ago," she said. Smooth talker. Said he was a land speculator. Set up that post office box, but he was always asking questions, quiet questions, about who lived where, who had money, about Ryder Reed. It was all clicking into place. Parker hadn't just been luring women to Wyoming for some cruel game. He was using them as cover, as a way to gather information, perhaps even as a way to get closer to Ryder. And she, Willow, had been his latest tool. Just as this realization hit her, the bell above the boarding house door jingled. A man stepped inside. He was tall, handsome, and dressed in an expensive suit that was completely out of place in Cottonwood Creek. He smiled, a charming, practiced smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Pardon the intrusion," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. "I'm looking for a Miss Willow Thompson. I believe there's been a terrible misunderstanding." It was him. Willow knew it in her bones. Edward Parker had finally decided to show his face. Parker was a master actor. He spun a tale for the whole dining room to hear. He claimed a business rival had sent the telegram as a cruel joke. He said he had been searching for her frantically ever since he realized what had happened. He presented Willow with a bouquet of flowers he must have had shipped in on the train. He was sorry. He was charming. He was everything she had once dreamed of. The town was eating it up. They saw a romantic story, a tragic mix-up righted at last. They saw a wealthy, handsome gentleman trying to win back his bride. They didn't see the predator underneath. Willow played along, her heart hammering against her ribs. She smiled, she acted relieved, but her mind was screaming. This man was connected to the Black Creek gang. He was the reason Ryder's cabin was covered in blood. Parker insisted on buying her dinner. As they sat at the table, he oozed charm. He talked about the beautiful house he would build for her, the life of luxury they would have. But Willow was watching his hands, watching the way he nervously twisted a silver ring on his pinky finger, watching the way his eyes darted toward the door every time it opened. "I heard you were found by a local rancher," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "A Mr. Ryder Reed?" "Yes," Willow said, keeping her voice steady. "He was very kind. He saved my life." "How fortunate," Parker murmured. "I must be sure to thank him personally." A chill went down Willow's spine. That wasn't an offer of thanks. It was a threat. Later that evening, after Parker had secured a room at the boarding house, the best room, of course, Willow found a note slipped under her door. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was rough, urgent. "He's lying. Parker leads the gang. He's not here for you. He's here for me, and for the ledger. Stay away from him. I will find you when it's safe." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. It was from Ryder, the ledger. That was the second time she'd seen that word. It was the key. Whatever it was, Parker wanted it badly enough to tear Ryder's life apart, and Ryder was willing to risk his own to protect it. The next day, Parker grew more insistent. He wanted to take her for a walk, to buy her a new dress, to make plans for their future. Willow made excuses, pleading a headache. She needed time to think. She stayed in her room, holding Ryder's note, her mind a whirlwind. Who was she supposed to trust? The charming gentleman who had broken her heart with a telegram, or the wanted outlaw who had saved her from a blizzard? The choice seemed insane, but in her heart she knew. She trusted the outlaw. She had to find a way to help him. That afternoon, she was mending a dress by the window in her room when she saw Parker talking to the town sheriff on the street below. They were laughing. Parker clapped the sheriff on the back. They looked like old friends. Willow felt a knot of ice form in her stomach. The law in Cottonwood Creek wasn't going to help her. It was already on Parker's side. She was on her own. As darkness fell, she made a decision. She packed a small bag with food, water, and the sturdiest pair of boots she owned. She took the silver locket Ryder had returned to her and tucked it safely in her pocket. Then she scribbled a quick note for Mrs. Wilson, telling her she'd gone for a long walk and not to worry. It was a weak lie, but it was the best she could do. Using the back stairs, she slipped out of the boarding house unnoticed. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get out of town, away from Parker. She headed toward the wilderness, toward the rolling hills that surrounded Ryder's land. Maybe, just maybe, he would find her there. She walked for hours, the moon her only guide. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl sent a jolt of fear through her. She was a city girl, a seamstress. She had no business being out here alone in the Wyoming wilderness. But the thought of Ryder, wounded and hunted, pushed her forward. The thought of Parker's cold eyes pushed her forward. Just as the sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light over the landscape, she stumbled. Her foot caught on a root, and she fell hard, her head hitting a rock. Stars exploded behind her eyes, and then everything went black. She woke up to the gentle pressure of a damp cloth on her forehead. For a moment she thought she was back in Ryder's cabin after the blizzard. But when she opened her eyes, the face looking down at her was not Ryder's. It was a woman's. An old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her hair as white as snow. "Easy now, child," the woman said, her voice raspy but kind. "You took a nasty fall." Willow sat up, her head throbbing. She was in a tiny, rustic shack, even smaller and rougher than Ryder's cabin. Herbs and dried flowers hung from the ceiling, and the air smelled of wood smoke and something else. Something medicinal. "Where am I?" Willow asked. "You're safe," the woman said. "My name is Adira. I live out here. Found you just after sunrise." Adira helped her sit up and gave her a cup of bitter-tasting tea. "Drink this. It'll help with the headache." As Willow drank, she noticed a rifle leaning against the wall by the door. This old woman who lived alone in the wilderness was not helpless. "I have to go," Willow said, trying to stand. "There's a man. I have to find him." "The one they call the ghost?" Adira asked, her dark eyes sharp and knowing. Willow froze. "How did you know?" "I know these hills better than I know my own face," Adira said. "I know the man who built a cabin by the creek, and I know he's been in trouble." She looked Willow up and down. "And I'm guessing you're the seamstress he can't stop talking about." It turned out Adira was something of a local legend, a healer, a hermit. People in town thought she was a crazy old woman, but she was sharp, and she saw everything. She had found Ryder after the attack on his cabin, dragged him back to her shack, and patched up the gunshot wound in his side. "He's alive," Willow breathed, relief so powerful it made her dizzy. "He's alive," Adira confirmed, "and stubborn as a mule. He left yesterday, before the wound was fully healed, said he had to protect you from Parker." She pointed to a trail leading away from her shack. "He went that way, headed for the old caves in the canyons, a good place to hide." Adira gave Willow a pouch of dried meat and a full canteen of water. "You're either the bravest fool I've ever met, or you're truly in love," the old woman said, a wry smile on her face. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Following Adira's directions, Willow made her way toward the canyons. The terrain grew rougher, the landscape more desolate. As she walked, she twisted her mother's locket in her fingers. It was the only thing she had that connected her to her old life, and now Ryder had touched it, returned it to her. It felt like a link between her past and her uncertain future. Late in the afternoon, she found him. He was sitting by a small fire in the mouth of a cave, his face pale and drawn, his shirt stained with fresh blood where his wound had reopened. He looked up as she approached, and the look on his face was a mixture of shock, relief, and anger. "Willow, what are you doing here?" he demanded, getting to his feet. "You should be in town where it's safe." "Safe?" she shot back. "Parker is in town. He's charming the whole county, and he's got the sheriff in his pocket. And he's looking for you. He's looking for something called a ledger." Ryder's face darkened. He sank back down, wincing in pain. "I should have known he'd come." He finally looked at her, his blue eyes full of a pain that had nothing to do with his injury. "You should have run, Willow. You should have gotten on the first train heading east and never looked back." "I don't run," she said softly, kneeling beside him. She opened her bag and took out the clean bandages she'd thought to bring. "Now, let me look at that." As she cleaned and redressed his wound, he told her everything. The Black Creek Gang, his role as their strategist, the robberies, the violence, and the man who led them all, a man far more ruthless and intelligent than any of them, Edward Parker. "I never wanted that life," Ryder said, his voice low. "I got in over my head. When I tried to leave, Parker put a bullet in me and left me for dead. He thought I was gone. He thought the ghost was finally a real ghost. He had survived, barely. He'd wandered for a year before finding Cottonwood Creek, a place where he thought nobody would ever find him. He changed his name. He started over. But I took something when I left," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I took the ledger. It has everything in it. Every crime, every name, every payoff, including the names of some very powerful men, even a territorial judge. It's the only thing that can bring Parker down for good, and it's my only real chance at a clean slate." "Where is it?" Willow asked. "Where did you hide it?" Ryder let out a short, humorless laugh. Somewhere Parker would never think to look. Somewhere so obvious it's brilliant. He reached out and gently took the silver locket from her hand. He's been looking for a book, a strong box. He'd never look for a few tiny, folded-up pages. He opened the locket. He carefully lifted the tiny portraits of her parents, and underneath, in a hidden compartment she never knew existed, were several pieces of paper, folded so small they were barely visible. The ledger. He had hidden it in her mother's locket when he'd found it and returned it to her. He had made her the keeper of his secret, his salvation, without her even knowing. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I put you in danger. From the moment I saw you on that platform, I knew Parker had sent you. I knew it was a trap. But I couldn't just leave you there to freeze." "So you saved me," she said, her heart aching. "And you tried to get me settled and then disappear, didn't you?" He nodded. "But I couldn't stay away." Their conversation was cut short by the sound of horses in the distance. A lot of them. "He found us," Ryder said, his hand immediately going to the pistol tucked in his belt. "His men must have tracked you from town." He shoved the locket back into her hand. "Willow, listen to me. Take this. There's a path at the back of this cave. It leads down the other side of the canyon. You run. Don't stop for anything. Get to the next town. Find the U.S. Marshals. Give this only to them." "I'm not leaving you," she said, her jaw set. "You can't fight them all on your own. You're injured." "I have to buy you time," he insisted, his eyes wild with desperation. "Now go." Voices echoed up the canyon wall. They were close. "There's no time for you to escape," Willow said, her mind working furiously. "But there might be time for a different plan." She looked at the narrow cave entrance, at the steep, rocky cliffs around them. "They're expecting a fight. They're not expecting a rock slide." It was a crazy, desperate plan, born of sheer terror and adrenaline. While Ryder positioned himself to fire on Parker's men as they approached, Willow used a loose piece of timber from an old mine support in the cave as a lever. She worked frantically, wedging it under a massive, precariously balanced pile of rocks just above the trail leading to the cave. Parker and 5 of his men rode into the narrow part of the canyon. "Callahan!" Parker's voice boomed. "I know you're in there. Give me the ledger and I'll let the girl live." "Stay back, Parker," Ryder yelled, firing a warning shot that echoed through the canyon. That was her signal. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Willow threw all her weight against the timber. It groaned, then splintered. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, rumbling groan, the rocks began to shift. It started small, a few pebbles, then a cascade. And then the whole cliff face seemed to give way. A river of rock and debris thundered down into the canyon, completely blocking the trail. It buried 2 of Parker's men and sent the others scrambling for their lives, their horses screaming in terror. Willow and Ryder were safe for now, but they were also trapped. The rock slide that had saved them had also sealed the main entrance to the cave. They were cut off. "The back path," Ryder gasped, clutching his side. "We have to use the back path now." They scrambled through the darkness of the cave, their only light the faint daylight filtering from the other end. The path was treacherous, a narrow ledge overlooking a sheer drop. Ryder, weak from his wound, stumbled. He would have fallen to his death if Willow hadn't grabbed his arm, holding him steady with all her might. They finally emerged onto the far side of the canyon, exhausted, bruised, but alive. They had the ledger. They were free. But as they looked back, they saw Parker and his remaining men on the other side, their faces contorted with fury. They were trapped, but Parker was, too. It was a stalemate. Or so they thought. "You think you've won?" Parker screamed across the chasm. "You have nowhere to run. I have men covering every trail out of these canyons." He was right. They had escaped the cave, but they were still in his territory. They were on foot, and Ryder was fading fast. His wound, which had been bleeding sluggishly, was now flowing freely. He collapsed against a rock, his face ashen. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't go on. You have to go, Willow. Take it and run." "No," she said, cradling his head in her lap. "We're in this together. You promised I'd never freeze again, Ryder Reed. I'm not about to let you bleed to death on some lonely mountain." She looked around wildly, searching for any hope, and then she saw it. A thin trail of smoke rising from a cluster of trees a few miles to the north. It wasn't much, but it was something. A trapper's cabin? A prospector? It didn't matter. It was a chance. With Ryder leaning heavily on her, they began to walk. Every step was agony for him. They moved at a snail's pace. The sun beat down on them. They had no water left. Hope began to fade. This was it. They had survived a blizzard, a manhunt, a rock slide, only to die of exposure in the middle of nowhere. Just as Willow was about to give up, she heard a sound, a dog barking, then a voice. "Hello? Is someone out there?" An old man with a long white beard stepped out from the trees, a hunting rifle in his hand. He was a prospector, and he'd been watching their slow, painful progress for the last hour. He had seen Parker's men on the other side of the canyon and knew something was wrong. With the prospector's help, they got Ryder to his small hidden camp. They stopped the bleeding and got some water and food into him. The old man, whose name was Silas, had a mule. He told them the nearest town with a real lawman, a U.S. Marshal's office, was 2 days' ride to the south. Parker and his men were to the east. They had a head start. "He'll be expecting you to head for the railroad to the north," Silas said, his eyes shrewd. "He'll never think you double back south through the Badlands." It was a dangerous gamble. The Badlands were treacherous, but it was their only hope. They left that night under the cover of darkness. Silas guided them through the first few miles before wishing them luck and turning back to his claim. For 2 days they rode. Willow held the reins while Ryder drifted in and out of consciousness behind her. The Badlands were a harsh, unforgiving landscape, but they were blessedly empty. They saw no sign of Parker or his men. Finally, on the evening of the second day, they saw the lights of a town. Redemption. They rode straight to the marshal's office. A grizzled, weary-looking marshal named Clay Harding listened to their story, his expression skeptical at first. But when Willow opened the locket and handed him the tiny folded pages of the ledger, his eyes widened. "I'll be damned," he breathed, scanning the first page. "I've been hunting Parker for 5 years. We never knew his real name. We never had proof." Within the hour, Marshal Harding had telegraphed every office in the territory. Posses were formed. Warrants were issued, not just for Parker and the Black Creek gang, but for the corrupt officials named in Ryder's ledger. Ryder, meanwhile, was taken to a doctor who stitched him up properly and declared that he would, miraculously, live. As Ryder rested, Marshal Harding sat down with Willow. "According to this ledger," the marshal said, his voice serious, "your fiancé, Mr. Callahan, is a wanted man. He participated in at least 3 armed robberies." "He saved my life," Willow said fiercely. "Twice. And without him, you'd still be hunting a ghost." Harding looked at her, then back at the ledger. "He also provided the evidence to take down one of the most dangerous gangs in this territory and to root out corruption at the highest levels. The judge is going to take that into consideration, especially with a star witness like you speaking on his behalf." A week later, Edward Parker and what was left of his gang were captured trying to board a train in Cheyenne. The corrupt judge was arrested in his own courtroom. The Black Creek gang was finished. Ryder went to trial. Willow was by his side the entire time. She told the court about the blizzard, about the kindness he'd shown her. She told them how he'd been trying to build a new, honest life. Backed by Marshal Harding's testimony and the incredible value of the ledger, the judge showed leniency. Ryder was sentenced to the 2 years he'd already served in his self-imposed exile, plus 1 year of probation. He was a free man, a truly free man, for the first time in his life. They returned to Cottonwood Creek not as a jilted bride and a mysterious recluse, but as heroes. The town that had whispered about them now welcomed them with open arms. Even the sheriff, embarrassed by his association with Parker, offered a grudging apology. Ryder, with Willow's help, rebuilt his cabin. It grew, room by room, into a proper house. Their small herd of cattle grew into a thriving ranch. 3 months after the trial, on a perfect summer morning, they stood in the small town church. Willow was wearing a wedding dress again. This one she'd made herself from simple white cotton, and she'd never felt more beautiful. As Ryder slipped a simple gold band on her finger, he leaned in and whispered, "Told you you'd never freeze again." And she never did. Their life wasn't easy. The West was a hard place. But through droughts and harsh winters, through the birth of their 2 sons and 1 daughter, they held on to each other. They had faced down outlaws and blizzards, and they had built a life on the foundation of a second chance. Every year, on the anniversary of that first snowstorm, Ryder would wrap Willow in his arms by the fire. He would hold up the small silver locket that she still wore every single day. And he would thank her for being braver than he ever was, for seeing the man he could be, not just the ghost he had been. If you believe that everyone deserves a second chance and that true love can be found in the most unexpected storms, then hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Let us know in the comments. What do you think would have happened if Ryder hadn't been on that road to the station on that fateful night?